No sound.
No.
What about now? Can you hear us?
No.
Is it working?
Okay, out.
No.
All right.
How about right now?
No.
Sounds like it's working.
Very good. Okay. I'm learning about the streaming kit, so streamer mode is enabled.
Ooh.
Okay. We should be good. I can check again.
All right.
But Duolingo, you're gonna have to wait. I'm sorry. It's not gonna happen right now.
What language are you doing?
I was doing German.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, Steven, can you pop the slideshow open and
yeah, I have it open.
And present it to Discord?
Yeah, how do you share? I have it open. How do you share screens on Discord?
There's
Why am I not seeing it?
So down where it says video connected, if you're in the general voice channel, there's a button with the TV with the loopy.
Was the
Oh, I see. Yep. Got it.
Yes.
Okay. Very
That
cool.
ought to be it.
Okay, I think we can see that now. Oh, it's only 720p, but that's okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Better than a kick in the shins, though.
It's definitely true. All right. Where's the full screen? Oh, slideshow. Okay. Still good. Yeah, we are. Nice. All right. So to kind of kick it off, today's discussion is kind of the recent happenings, the recent discussion around the move by the Ukrainian government to kind of bring some of the anti-corruption agencies under kind of executive control. What happened, protests, the rationale behind that, and sort of the power of the people voicing their concern and how this whole process was handled. So, with that being said, we'll kind of move through a couple discussion points here.
Yeah.
So,
this is. I have a big.
Do you want to say something here, Ben?
About this, because I don't know. It's not an insignificant thing, but it's also. I don't know if it's a commentary in our news cycle that just nobody cares about this anymore. When all of the far right people were just screaming about this, and now not a peep. I don't know how much monitoring. I haven't really been monitoring the English language media lately, but Marjorie Taylor Greene's not screaming about this anymore. No one's screaming about this anymore. Whereas they were treating this as Satan in the Book of Revelations. Zelensky, the famous neo-Nazi Jew, but and now it's just total radio silence.
Yeah, exactly, which is interesting. Very kind of short shelf life, right? It picked up kind of news coverage very quickly, and there was a week or a couple weeks of protests, which I suppose have largely dissipated. But I guess one of the points is that the protests achieved the desired outcome. So maybe that's why they're stopping discussing it in the news cycle. I don't know.
That's fair.
At least in the US. But, so what we're going to kind of talk about today, I think, is, one of the things, right, happening kind of in the background is EU ascension, and one of the requirements that any applicant needs to make progress on is anti-corruption and kind of the transparency associated with, their anti-corruption efforts. And Ukraine has made progress since their candidacy began in 2022. So, was this seen as like a pause for that? Perhaps, right? If they hadn't kind of reversed course, I would say that's possible that, in terms of EU criteria, it could have set them back. I don't know, though. We'd have to kind of discuss like the rationale to bring these agencies under executive control in the first place.
Yeah.
But it, generated the largest protest since Euromaidan. I had heard so. Yeah. huge effort, to go out there, protest, coordinate all that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's a hairy thing. It's a hairy thing no matter what, right? Americans do not understand living in a country that's actively at war. We haven't done that since, I mean, for all intents and serious purposes, since World War II. Vietnam was not a threat to the homeland. I don't think the Korean War was a threat to the homeland. And all of this stuff, we really need to be nailing home the point that for all of the things that the Ukrainian government is doing, right? And we could even have discussions about, okay, maybe there was a potential for a little bit of executive overreach here. First off, the Americans, especially right now, we need to make our own beds and acknowledge that people also had similar criticisms with Winston Churchill in World War II, right? When people were locking down the media a little bit, when people were going after certain saboteurs a little harder, when people were going after dissidents a little harder, because this has to be very heavily contextualized. But at the end of the day, Ukrainians are getting bombed, Americans are not. So we have a country that's obviously a dictatorship in play, and we have a company that's obviously not a dictatorship in play, and that needs to be delineated and maintained throughout the course of this discourse. And I know we're going to do that, but that's just a key takeaway from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely a good point. Right. And again, the difference in expectations, you wouldn't expect to have the same level of independence and autonomy that these agencies have. I mean, that doesn't exist in Russia. Granted, they're not an EU candidate. Belarus is not an EU candidate, right? But in democracies, there should be this kind of autonomy. But to Ben's point, you add a wartime environment in there, that changes in a way that we can't fully appreciate if you're not in a country that's actively at war. So, yeah, I, that's a good point. Any other points here on this slide?
Well, as we discuss like the agencies, so probably worth of mentioning that we're talking not about the like two countries that are actively in the full scale war. So it's about like two different sides, because like on the one side we have like an axis that Russia, China, like North Korea, like etc., like global South, and on the other side we have like democracies and the countries who would like to improve their institutions, and Ukraine is one of those countries. So, and like the topic of today's stream is about the like about the affairs that are happening on the like side of democracies.
Yeah.
And like all things connected to that, regardless the today's events like somewhere far north.
We'll get to, but yeah, I think that's a good point. All right, so it matters. This is important. It didn't just happen and then go away. There was a lot of opinions on this. So,
especially when you compare it to the American institutions, how they're being tested now at a time that's not war.
Oh yeah, 100%, absolutely. So for context, we just wanted to provide a little bit of kind of background when this happened. So I'm not overly familiar with kind of the legislative process in Ukraine. I think you'd call it a bill. It would go before the is it Verkhovna Rada, and then they kind of ratify things, and then it goes to Zelensky to put into law, to sign into law. Is my understanding? Please correct me if I'm wrong. So that
handle that. So
Artem, you might know that legislative part better.
Continue. Are we talking about the law on July 21st?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
okay. Like let's have a bit of like the story why we have those agencies at all. So it's not just like some special like prosecutor office, or it was a requirement of the European Union for Ukraine to have them.
A long time ago.
And like Ukrainian institution, like the parliament, the president, or the government, they have no impact on those agencies. and that was the requirement of the European Union for starting the process of for the starting of the first cluster of the Ukraine
Accession
moving
program.
towards the Union.
Yeah.
So, but everything changed on July 21st.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we Ukraine got in a situation when actually the streets can speak again, and the difference for this time that was the protest of youth, and we had first protest back in 2004, and that was about the name. The second revolution, the second protest, that was about the course where the country moves, right? When the third one, or the beginning of third one, or the first protest that we have with the recent events, despite the war, that's about institutions. So we shifted our attention from the names to institutions, because names they come and go, institutions they last. So, and that was the protest about institution to be in order, as much as possible.
Prior to the law being passed, prior to July 21st, how sort of aware, how much would the public have known the details of this law? Because we know the protests happened the day after the law was passed. Was there discussion? Were there kind of protests? Not really, as I understand, prior to that. Did everyone just kind of hear about it when it was passed into law in Ukraine?
From my perspective, that was very sudden event. So no one expected that was not an issue, because everyone agreed on the things that, okay, we're building institutions here. So there is some bureaucracy we have to go through, and it's normal.
Sure. Yeah.
And the youth that we see there, actually the age of the first Orange Revolution. So that's the new generation. That's not the same people that went even for previous protests.
Yeah, you guys have been solidly going out to protest stuff that's you don't like for the last 20 some years. Whereas once again, the Russians have not.
That's true.
Well,
Yeah.
the government did something, and the government got a reaction
Oh my God.
from streets.
That sounds so democratic. How could you possibly assume that would happen?
Yeah, that's difficult to make up something about democracy in Ukraine, in this matter.
I guess to Steven's point, that's maybe why MAGA kind of left it, because it's such a nothing burger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is not much of violence when the protests took the place.
Sure.
No, it was I had a bunch of people, because again, Lviv, but and we posted some of the signs. I think even the thumbnail of this YouTube thing has this kind of tongue-in-cheek, NABU, no Sith on NABU, get the Sith off of NABU sort of thing, which for those uninitiated is a Star Wars reference, and you should go watch Star Wars right now if you haven't watched Star Wars, just the first 4, 5, and 6. But there was not even whereas you look back in the day, there's stuff where there is a police presence, right? There's a police presence for the pride parades. There's a police presence for, big or sporting events. But this was just very much people standing around with signs, people playing music. I didn't hear any issues or any incidents of anything that happened in regards to even the Russian titushki, which were injected into the Euromaidan to intentionally try to smear them. There was none of that, because this was just, wouldn't you know it, a pure Ukrainian protest. People with signs going outside to protest the government, and bada bing, bada boom, he did it. All right, the Parliament reversed it.
Yes. After
Speaking
about a
of
week.
Star Wars, sorry.
No, do it.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to make a comment.
Popcorn Artem.
Artem, you go ahead.
Sorry about that. No, it's just from the protest and mentioned the Star Wars episodes. It sounds like may NABU be with you.
Ooh, this is why you need to be in marketing.
And because like we don't need anything else. Like they don't touch what's already working somehow, and the
Mhm.
EU is agree with that.
Yeah.
I-
Yeah.
In fairness, I've heard also internet conspiracy theory that people think that Zelensky was playing 5D chess by like
Well, I wish.
yeah,
I
right.
wish.
That's kind of the thing. I can't get onto that theory, but just so that the world knows, there were people that thought that,
Yeah,
Zelensky,
I
the
mean,
ultimate autocrat in Ukraine that has mind control over everybody, got his entire party to push this thing out the door at the last minute, and he just kind of bait and switched everybody to just show what a democratic nation Ukraine is. Like, I don't, I'm a big
Mhm.
fan of Ukraine. I'm a big chess beater about Ukraine, but I don't think that was the case here. I think there was a stupid law that might have been pushed through, and the people pushed back, and they were like, "Oh, okay, fine, yeah, let's not do that." Um,
All right.
but
I think you're right. Okay. So, kind of continuing that point, power grab or national security, right? Like if
yeah,
we go back to kind of the rationale behind the law in the first place, again, right? There are reforms happening not just because of the war, but because they're trying to, make their candidacy for the EU more, competitive, and people in Ukraine are largely in favor of EU membership. I believe I don't know the exact percent. But then, this happened for about a week, 8 days, and kind of as we have here, whoa, is this an example of, democratic backsliding? Are the freedoms being curtailed under, the guise of war, and that we can't, have our full freedom of speech? So I don't know if we want to discuss kind of the rationale, like, what was the law originally intended to do that didn't exist before, I guess is the question.
I'm gonna let Artem take that one because I only have speculation really on this.
it's also speculation because the only difference from other like prosecutor agencies like this in Ukraine, so they do not report to the president. They're like
Mhm,
fully independent. Maybe that
mhm,
was the matter of access to some like data, but nothing more I can tell because those agencies they don't just do their job on their own. They also collaborate with the uh, other agencies from the European Union and the states.
mhm.
So they're fully independent.
Yeah, absolutely. So it wasn't even enough time, like the week or so, to see what, the difference would have been like with those agencies under kind of more executive control. It was widely derided as a, you know, loss of sovereignty or, executive overreach, but Um, there were, I think, for the most part, as we said, very peaceful protests. I don't recall hearing much about, kind of riots or destruction or anything like that. And then dissipated pretty quickly, right? I think after the
Yeah,
parliament kind of reversed the law, people went back to their, you know, business. So,
yeah,
which really, if you think about it too, talks, I would say, like, volumes to the kind of like resilience of democracy in that country, right? Again, a Star Wars analogy, right? He's not Palpatine. It's not a consolidation of power. It's a, I would say under pressure reaction to the will of the people who,
yeah.
I think kind of spoke with one voice. I don't know how many people were really in favor of the loss of autonomy of those two agencies. So I would highlight that the fact that okay, a week later it's kind of reversed. That's
It,
that's a good thing.
it was such a bizarre kind of. I don't even know. I mean, maybe I guess you could call it a litmus check for the health of the democracy of Ukraine. Because if you think about it, and this is a thing that, again, you would know if you're living it in country, but, especially military folk and civilians, we have things, there's things like concerts that go on in Ukraine still, but especially in the east and center of Ukraine, we've not seen situations where, or rather, let me, how do I put this? Russia has enthusiastically attacked dense population centers where they know people are clustered
Mm,
in things like train stations and all sorts of other public and civil infrastructure. So when you look at this weird, and we were having discussions about this back when it was going on, that there's this weird, like, thousands of people coming out to meet and they're not being touched
mm,
by the Russians because there was maybe that moment of hesitation, like, oh shit, how are the Ukrainians actually going to respond to this? Is because it was great optics for them, right? That was when everybody
mhm,
was full circle. You know, this is horrible Ukrainian corruption. It's the neo-Nazi contingency. They're trying to erode Ukraine's democracy. Zelensky's dictator, all that kind of stuff. And that's like the biggest indication that that played in Russia's favor is that Russia did not touch it, right? They
mhm.
didn't disrupt that at all. However, that blew up in their face completely and hilariously because democracy works in democratic countries and countries that have a democratic established culture. Um, so I find that to be deeply funny, personally, because you know the Russians could have just as easily like tossed a shot head across the border, you know what I mean? And an air alarm would have gone off, and then the protests would have been largely probably dispersed because people would have gone about their way. But the Russians, like, maybe I don't know if you want to put it on tin hat, maybe the Russians wanted to let that play out, anticipating that they were going to get some really juicy material
Mm,
for it, and it just completely went the opposite way. So
yeah, I would agree with that. Absolutely. Okay. So, let's take a look here. So, we have to kind of keep in mind, like, the country is actively at war, right? So, this didn't exist in a vacuum and probably almost certainly would not have happened if the war had never happened in the first place. So, again, we mentioned before it was a peaceful protest, right? It, you know, didn't have mass lootings or riotings and major anti-government protests since 2022, although I don't even know if in 2022 they were actually anti-government, like I wouldn't say anti-Ukrainian government protests, if I recall correctly. But again, it's interesting the way this is kind of being portrayed by, I guess, some of the protesters, maybe some of the media in that 7, 8 day span when this happened. So, this is dishonoring our, fallen soldiers. And, we are seeing this as a huge betrayal of, our liberty, but kind of the framing it in the context of war and the, soldiers who had died is an interesting kind of line of reasoning with protesters. So I don't know if anyone has thoughts there. If you heard that kind of
no,
narrative
that,
being
that's
discussed.
that's pretty consistent with a lot of the general, more minor protests that have been going on. Stuff that's never going to make English language news, but you know, there was a very popular protest that was just kind of a continuous thing. Like once a day, we have the protest to get the people that out of the Azovstal plant so that they could be freed, right? So that's just a regular week on week effort that happens in Lviv, at least all the time. I'm sure it happens other places too. There was another one that's super popular where, there were certain civil infrastructure projects that, for things like sports complexes or things that people protested
Mm,
against and came out that saying like, like we don't need money for this, spend it on drones, spend it
mm,
on supporting the troops. So there is constantly a very healthy culture in Ukraine of people coming out specifically to redirect or to try to influence the local governance to say like, hey, we need to kind of swap up some priorities here in order to honor the people that are coming through and doing the fighting, right? And I don't know, again, I'm assuming this is happening in most Ukrainian cities. I just have only spent time in Lviv recently, so I can only speak to that. But Lviv feels it rather hard because Lviv is also a very big uh, graveyard slash they do the burial ceremonies for soldiers right in the downtown every
mm,
single day, day after day. You can walk down Lviv and there's very nice placards of the people that have passed and been killed in the war.
mm,
So it's very felt all the time. This thing of like, we need to be here for the soldiers right now. Soccer stadiums can wait. All this other shit can wait. You know, so it's like it's a very normal thing. People protesting something. I don't know how else to put it. That's at least been my experience.
They're
Well, and
protesting and supporting at the same time.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
So it's a
it
protest, but protest for support.
and has results, as we saw. Like, it gets things done in Ukraine.
It does.
I mean, the government
It
reversed
does,
their,
but the damage is done as
steps.
well.
That's true. I would agree with that. So it's just an interesting narrative, and I think it was pointed out that you don't hear a lot reported in English language media. So,
Yeah.
all right,
So there's more damage done putting Paris in the strait between English and England and France. But I guess was that a
so,
ChatGPT map?
100% was.
Okay.
Oh, like Rome's like down in Greece.
Yeah. Was that Valhalla in Africa? Could you go back to that real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Ukrainians
Is
don't
that
do
Valhalla?
violence like in
Oh,
France.
it's Valletta in Malta.
Oh, okay.
But still, I think it's
Okay. I'm watching on like the
much.
screen, the OBS stream view, so
Oh,
everything's like super
right.
small. I thought it was Valhalla. It's like what?
Go
Okay.
in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
Um, so we
Mm.
Hmm.
talked about these points a little bit before, but kind of it changed course. The government changed course pretty quickly, I would say. Which again, I think speaks volumes to the resiliency and the role that people have in being able to protest. And I don't think that point can be overstated. But again, did it bring about lasting kind of institutional change? Would we expect to see a similar kind of legislative action like that again? I would think probably not, certainly to that magnitude, right? Are we going to be more transparent? Again, I'd be curious to kind of look what was being discussed in the news. What did kind of people know about prior to July 21? Because certainly in the U.S., long before a bill is passed, brought to the president, it's discussed ad nauseum. At least certain bills, for the
Yeah.
most part, like this most recent one that a lot of people are not happy about. I would
One
say
big
probably
beautiful bill.
rightfully so. Big ugly bill, as I've heard it called. But the point is, if this was something that was really being discussed and there was a lot of kind of backlash, negativity, it probably wouldn't have even gotten to that you know point it did, like being signed into law on July 1st. And so I don't. I think it'd be increasingly more difficult for the government to try this again. There are going to be more protests, and hopefully they learned a lesson, so to speak. Any thoughts there?
I have some, but I'll
Yeah.
let Artem go.
Okay. So I don't expect anything to happen like this, but regarding the events and the speed with which the legislation was brought back, uh, it seems to me like Ukrainian government exercises the tolerance of the European bureaucrats, of the flexibility with which they
Mm.
can go towards whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
So it depends on conditions, of course.
Sure.
But on the other hand, Ukrainian government can turn like 180 degrees like towards Russia and say, okay, now we're in favor on Russia because Russians hate them and most of their property are in the European Union.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point.
So
Yeah.
so, and I suspect that Ukrainian government would like to keep that property.
Mhm.
So I don't expect like big scandals, but something small
Mhm.
might happen. So that's always a possibility, always a chance of that.
Based on the timeline and the comps, right, from the presidential office, my understanding is that this bill kind of popped up pretty rapidly. It was reviewed pretty rapidly and approved pretty rapidly, and then we got this immediate pushback. So in the day of, Zelensky did not really announce anything. There was no official information coming from the presidential office, specifically when a lot of people were waiting around saying, let's wait for him to say something. And when he did say something,
Mm.
it was that day, or I think immediately after that, somewhere around there, it was within 24 hours. He said, no, we're going to revise this. We're going to relook at this. And he made good on that promise.
Mhm.
Right. As we see, this was, in any case, announced, protested, repealed, revised, removed in just with extreme rapidity. This is light speed
Mm.
for anything, especially Stephen, like you're saying, with the one big beautiful bill, big old air quotes there. It was a disaster in the House. It barely got through.
Mhm.
You know, this is again one of the hugest problems with our system because it being only two party. It was just like right down to one or two people. It gets tossed to the Senate. The Senate are disgusted by it. They threw it back to the House because they added a whole bunch of shit to it that then had to be re-ratified by the House, and it was just going back and forth. And obviously, that bill is larger in scope than this is. But in the spectrum of, pure, only absolute bad, Emperor Palpatine, the gay Islamist neo-Nazi Jewish cabal Zelensky was getting approached by an independent anti-corruption body, and therefore he just wanted to kick them to the curb. Or the other end of that spectrum, which is NABU is full of Russians and only the SBU knows about it, and they don't need to make that information public
Mm.
because that's what Ukrainians do tend to do at the highest level when it comes to a lot of things happening. Ukrainians are generally very quiet until
Mm.
things are resolved, and then we see reports of things happening afterwards. Whereas Russians are very eager to kind of fill the space with a bunch of garbage, very different information control theories used in very different ways for obviously different ends. So, you know, I look at this and I see, let's remove Zelensky from the equation and just treat this as a purely structural thing. We have a government that passed a law that was rejected by a people who came out to protest. They peacefully protested. Nothing was burned down. Nobody was shot. There was no tear gas canisters deployed. There was no National Guard deployed. There were no Marines deployed to suppress this. The president apologized and said, we're going to relook at it. They re-looked at it. They found most of it to be irrelevant, and they threw it out.
Mhm.
It's not sexy. It's not flashy. But what else do you want in terms of just a government or a government structure and a president that is accountable in front of the people? What more could be done?
Yeah.
This is textbook right here. Like,
Yeah. I
it's almost
agree.
so boring that I feel like this could be just the content of like an essay question, some kind of standardized test. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Huh. That's a
Uh,
good point. I I would agree with that. All right. Here, let's take a look. So, kind of, the discussion about, well, what do people really think of the government now, right? Has irreparable harm been done? I think perhaps the population can take solace in the fact that it was reversed, that their voice was heard, and not just in a kind of, oh, well, thank you for telling us your point of view, constituent, but actually, you know, they're protesting, they're speaking up, accomplished, what I would again say the vast majority. I haven't seen polling on kind of how many percent of people were in favor versus opposed, but I think by and large, the vast majority of people were opposed to this bill. So, um, you know, in what's unique about this particular bill is people seeing anti-corruption as being so important, meaning like NABU has such an important role that, even if we like Zelensky and, I think he, at one point had a very high approval rating, but, even
Still
if we like
does.
him, it
Still
still does. I think
crazy high
it
approval rating.
decreased a little bit, but,
Yeah.
people are seeing that not just his role as the executive, but the role of this anti-corruption agency is so vital to their democracy that that's why this happened, right? Other bills that people don't like probably wouldn't have garnered the same attention and response that this particular one did. So I don't know if anyone wants to kind of make a point about the importance of the autonomy, right, of this anti. Why is anti-corruption so important? That's what this is about.
Well, that's easy. That's very easy. Why anti-corruption is important? Like let's do not forget that we're talking about the post-Soviet country.
Sure.
So and probably this is the only example of democracy that is so transparent, and we can witness it live at the moment, only because of the war. So everyone is paying attention because Ukraine has a war with Russia, and with Russia that is backed with Chinese supply, etc. But this is not the point. So the point is we can, in my opinion, we cannot consider, for example, the success of Baltic countries and compare it to Ukraine, because Baltic countries were occupied for way shorter period of time than Ukraine. So it matters, and they're smaller. They're already in NATO, in the European Union, so they are all right with their institutions, regardless that the population and the political views of some big groups in those countries are kind of questionable at the moment. But this is not the point as well. So for Ukraine, it's also a chance to protect an institution that is about to maintain justice. Because Ukrainians didn't see justice for many years, for many decades.
Mm-hmm.
And even post-Soviet Ukraine, after Soviet Union time, Ukrainians didn't see justice they would like to.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a chance. The protest for a chance, not a personality, just a chance to get something done in a normal way. And this is democracy that works the way that it works. Because in most post-Soviet countries, nothing works. They're still authoritarian. They're still the same. They're like mini versions of the late Soviet Union.
Yes. Which, if you look at the countries that became countries in 1991, or right around there, we can just rattle them off. Ukraine, a democracy struggling for its life, or not struggling, but a democracy that is fighting for its life, right, against an authoritarian oppressor, Russian, that is absolutely authoritarian. Well, Stephen, you're better with the terminology here. Is Russian authoritarian? Is that totalitarian war? Or
No, authoritarian, totalitarian would be, well, what's interesting too is totalitarian, I would say, is mostly kind of a 20th century, word to apply to, kind of what we called fascist governments, which I think that could go hand in hand. But no, I would call Russia authoritarian.
Okay, well, we could approach from the inverse. So, Russia's democracy score, I would say, would be extremely low, if not non-existent.
Sure.
I would say the same for Belarus. I would say the same for many of the stands, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Poland, I think, Poland got out, but they had a very strong, well-defined culture as well that resisted. They obviously still have issues with Russian influence, which is why, for example, the Russian
They
consulate
have never been in the
Krakow.
Soviet Union.
Yeah, but I mean, they still have issues. They just
They
closed
still
the Russian
have.
consulate in Krakow because the Russians were running around fucking burning shit down and convincing the Polish farmers to burn Ukrainian grain carts or whatever it is at the border.
I heard about that.
Yeah, so that still happens, but Ukraine culturally gets there's such a big component here that it's really hard to talk about because it's just purely cultural, right? We look at this as a democratic norm, which is weirdly redundant for us as Americans, but we look at the government does something crappy, the people protest. The government then stops doing the crappy thing, everyone's happy. That is not a reality in so much of the world, which is a thing that you cannot understand unless you go to those places, right? You can understand, if you don't see it firsthand, you don't live in it. And that is so, first off, I don't even know how you generate it if you're starting from zero. I feel like you got to have it just ingrained in you. And the Ukrainians have had constitutions for 400 years, so they get it, whereas the Russians do not.
True.
And this is just yet another example, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
The hetmans were democratically elected.
Yeah.
the Cossack leaders.
Well,
Like,
one of the criticisms is that the election, because of the war and because of practical reasons, has been delayed, and Zelensky's stayed past his original, I think, is it 5-year
yep,
appointment, and
yes,
there's certainly criticism there. I don't think kind of recall efforts, like we've seen for certain governors in the U.S., but again, logistically, practically, you can't really call an election. People are abroad, people are fighting, so it'd be interesting to see how that kind of happened if Poroshenko were, if there was another person who, let's say, didn't ever have his level of popularity, if someone had kind of just barely won the election in 2019, would the populace see this as a consolidation of power? I don't know. But that is something I've only heard kind of a little bit of criticism, a little, not even really protesting, I would say, in terms of, we're what, a year past kind of when the election should have happened. But
Churchill was in the chair for like 15 years. Like he came in
that's,
1940, right? Like
But
yeah,
he had a break, didn't he?
he
he
had a
did,
break,
yeah,
but like either way during World War II, the British made the same very logical conclusion that it's impractical to overturn your country's government during
true.
wartime. To their credit, those Brits understand the Blitz, and they understand
Mm,
they would at least be able to probably speak to it and say like, okay, this is going pretty all right for us. It could be going much worse. Right? In all fairness, this is another interesting discussion we have. Look at Ukraine's last 3 presidents and then put them up against Zelensky and tell me which one that you would choose.
yeah, it's a
I
good
think
point.
most
Exactly.
Ukrainians would say Zelensky overwhelmingly.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's why he won with like 72% of the vote over Poroshenko. And
yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong, was Poroshenko even overly unpopular to begin with? Did, Zelensky just really come in and just, I mean, perhaps that's a discussion for another time, but
he won every region except Lviv, and Lviv
yeah.
is Poroshenko's hometown, so
Oh,
that's why
that makes
probably he
sense.
lost that. But
Okay.
Not
Zelensky,
Lviv.
Artem said no. He didn't
well,
No,
win Lviv?
no,
he won Lviv, but it wasn't his hometown.
no, I thought Poroshenko
Oh,
was
No,
from.
he
Where's he from?
where's his
from
hometown?
well, he like childhood in Moldova now, but
He's from Moldova?
then Vinnytsia.
Oh, see, I didn't know
Oh,
that.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So not Lviv, but I mean it doesn't matter because usually people are getting tired of any politicians that they see since they won. They are in chairs, so that's
Mm,
fine.
Yeah,
It's just not the time because not the time to protest against the government.
mhm,
Again, because the protest was like in favor of the independence of the agencies.
yes,
true.
excellent point.
So
Yeah,
because not against the government because of the war. So we still understand the responsibility, and the government didn't have much of choice because
Mm,
government still needs funds from the states and the
the
European
government
Union. So
always has a choice. The government absolutely had the choice.
mm,
They could have
yeah, but then they put into at risk their own property that they have in the European Union.
I'm not
true.
here to say that governments don't make stupid decisions, but I'm saying your government, the Ukrainians, absolutely could have made a very stupid decision,
Mm,
and they did not do that.
true.
They could have absolutely just absorbed the power and, eroded those executive guardrails and moved on with their lives and flipped the bird to the Europeans and their own people. But they did not do that. The president apologized.
Mm, good point.
Like, this is
Something rare.
it's unthinkable for me personally as a
So,
citizen of the United States.
Is it reference to Trump?
Not
well,
only,
so
but
what we're
yeah,
looking at here is kind of, what I would call not quite an apples to apples comparison, because, if you talk about approval ratings, how valid is that data? And you're kind of comparing different types of governments here, right? Like, what does it say if, people
yeah,
are giving Putin in that middle graph, as you can see? consistently above 80% going back to 2022, which is when we started looking at that, and all of a sudden his popularity shoots up. So I don't think you can put a whole lot of stock in those numbers.
Dude, these are good
Um,
graphs.
and
These are
the one for the president in the U.S. is interesting too, because you had a transition happen at the beginning of this year, and those numbers are pretty. Well, again, it's interesting. Biden kind of low 40s, kind of drops off a bit. Oh, Trump won. People are happy about Trump, and his popularity really went down. As you can kind of see there, from kind of mid upper 40s to what is it? Probably about 37, so
Mhm.
about a 10-point drop, pretty significant. And then Zelensky too. Again, I'd want to know kind of more about the pollster and all that, but 65% is still pretty good, and that's higher than any U.S. president has had, I think, since Bill Clinton.
Like
But
JFK or something, yeah.
yeah, like those
Yeah.
are like the most popular person. And again, I think that there's been a couple things that perhaps he's done that people haven't agreed with. And Artem, you might know this better, but I think last year he replaced the head of the military with someone who was not seen as being overly popular. I forget the
Sirsky.
name, but
Well,
okay, yeah,
he is an ambassador in the UK right now.
Zaluzhny
oh,
is, yes.
Yeah, Zaluzhny. So
okay,
technically, he still can be elected because the embassy is
right,
the territory of Ukraine. So we still have a
sure,
chance
sure,
for a good candidacy, like for the
mm,
president
sure,
chair. But we also compare here the popularity of the government of the presidents, like in different countries. But in case of Ukraine, it might be just two different meanings because people support their government, not personalities. It's
hmm
because of the
hmm
like in the war times.
Yeah.
true,
And we made a whole separate video on
So
that where the framing for the protests was intentionally misdirected to serve anti-Ukraine narratives. Or, like, as you guys touched on, the core of the protest was to say, "Hey, government, we want these rails, we want these guardrails in place, we want these systems to remain as decentralized and independent as possible." The protests were not Zelensky is an MFer. You need to you need to resign. It was nothing. It was
hmm
not that. It was never coming after anybody specific. It was never Ukrainian expression for them to overturn some kind of leader. And you know what else it wasn't? The Euromaidan was also not an expression for them to
mm,
overturn a leader. It was an
right,
expression for them to go out and protest a bad policy that then boiled over because the leader in the Euromaidan tried to clamp down and use
mm,
force to solve the problem. And we saw how that turned out. He turned out just running away to Russia after he opened fire on his own people. So again, 10 years, significant change. That's point number one. Point number two, I think we have to. These graphs are amazing, Steven. So thank you for finding these. I love this
sure.
presidential
Well,
graph.
they're actually they don't exist. I mean, they like I generated them.
Yeah.
Like
Wait,
they're
what?
not copied from somewhere.
Dude, you
It's
homebrewed these?
Python, yeah, in the background,
Woo!
but that's
All right. Go on and brush your shoulders off. But there's the general trend that I was trying to point out that there's the incumbent curse in everything, right? Where the longer you stay in power, the more people are going to be unhappy with you sooner or later, or
sure.
be tired of you, and you being in power gives your opponents time and opportunity to capitalize on whatever. So it's normal for these numbers to go down. George Bush, I think George
Mm,
W. Stephen, he went from like what 85, 90% after nine
yeah,
11 down
he had
to like
about 90.
yeah, right. Which is, I get it. It's a time of national unity, but then it was
Sure,
in 2008 he went to like 25%,
I think you're right.
something like
Like
that. Like he just, it's like a vertical
plummeted.
line
Yeah,
over time,
exactly.
you know. So the fact that through all of these things, through all of the trials and tribulations of 2022, 3, 4, 5, him overstepping, well, not overstepping, but him, being in a wartime situation where, again, it doesn't really make sense to swap the leadership here, and he's still sitting at 66%. That's outrageous. Political American presidents don't come in with 50%.
No.
And then they only deteriorate from there generally. So
Yeah.
it is A, it's a testament to Zelensky. B, it's a testament to the Ukrainian government. C, it's a testament to the Ukrainian people who are
Mm-hmm.
still
Mm-hmm.
understanding the core here. It's like they have to be a united front. And
Sure.
just to drive it all home, anybody saying that Zelensky is a dictator that needs to be kicked out because he's violating some aspect of the Ukrainian constitution is serving Russian propaganda sources. Ignore them.
I would agree with that. And, a lot of what's happening, to your point is, you know, being kind of viewed by Europe, by other countries, what is the next step going to be? Like, if they had handled this, kind of anti-corruption autonomy issue separately, would the EU have taken a look and, oh wait, hold on, maybe they're backsliding a little bit, And then another thing is right, a lot of the kind of provisions placed on different, gifts, military hardware, etc., has a lot of kind of restrictions that Ukraine needs to think about. And how do we handle kind of those restrictions when still kind of preserving our national sovereignty, right? An example being, the conditions attached to the is it ATACMS? I forget the term for the most
Yeah.
recent gift of missiles that can strike pretty far deep into Russia. They're cautious with how they kind of use those things. I think if there were no stipulations attached to any of the hardware given to them, the war would look very different and much more in Ukraine's favor. That's my guess.
Yes. Agreed.
So
100%.
it's
Attackums
thoughts
don't even
there.
shoot that far. Like it's not a
I-
it's a legacy system. We don't even use it anymore.
Is
We've
it
complete
HIMARS then? What's the more recent um, you know, missile that they've been getting? I know it's not the Patriot, but there's something
Attackums
they
is
have.
the system that Biden and Jake Sullivan had put the restrictions on after giving them the Attackums.
Mm,
So
mm,
it's a thing that they weren't allowed to use to strike into Russia, and that gave the Russians time to deploy all their
mm,
stuff to the
right.
interior.
Move. Yeah, I heard that.
So, but it's not a deep strike capability either way.
Mm,
That system, if you look at it in conjunction with the other things that, well, first off, the Americans didn't get a lot of them, so this is not something that the
hmm
Ukrainians can just
hmm
like willy-nilly use. Second off, the Ukrainians have other long distance systems that they can use, such as like the Neptune that we've seen used to sink the
mm,
Moskva. Third off, the Ukrainians immediately kind of got that picture and they went around it, which is why we see that they have these deep strike capabilities coming from internal in Russia production of things like
mm, mm,
the spider web with drones, or they had
hmm
a big oil thing out in, oh goodness, I don't even know. It was somewhere just thousands of miles in the Russian interior where they just got like a Cessna and they strapped a bomb to it inside of Russia and took off in an
Wow.
airfield and just like yeeted that thing into a Russian oil. It's something that, so, yeah, this is, I don't know. I agree with you, Stephen, more broadly that the escalation management is giving us the exact same results that it did in 1939.
Yeah.
The Ukrainians, I think, I don't know. That's all. I'm just going to stay with that here. So
Yeah. Agree. And everyone's watching and kind of seeing them do really well with what they have. Again, given all the restrictions and stipulations that they have. But a lot
yes,
of the drone technology too is developed in Ukraine. You know,
yes,
like the well, yeah, the what was it, the spider web? Like that was all conducted. Weren't they like dormant for months and like snuck into Russia different ways, and then all became active and flew over
they were
different military
manufactured.
sites?
My understanding is they were manufactured inside of Russia. So they had the
Okay.
parts imported, they were assembled in Russia. The operators had to be, at that point, they coordinated the fake truck beds, coordinated the shipments with Russians. The Russians truck drivers were told to come get the bed. And when they approached their target, they got a phone call, or rather, the point is
Mm,
they got a phone call saying, you need to park the truck at location X. and then unhitch it, someone else will come pick it up for the next leg. And they had operators in country, which would be over, several dozen at least,
Sure.
that deployed the system simultaneously to just bomb the shit out of,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
right.
anywhere from what the Pentagon thinks, 10 to 20%, the Ukrainians call it a straight third, 40% of the Russian
Sure.
bomber fleet for billions of dollars of damage with just an FPV drone, which the videos were amazing.
Yeah.
What can be
I
a better
remember.
promotion of software development?
Yeah. Exactly. Good question.
There is none.
Both
So you
think
can
so.
get, yeah.
So as we kind of get close to wrapping things up here, what are kind of the long term implications for restoring and maintaining the autonomy and independence of this anti-corruption agency, right? At some point, right, and even prior to the war, Ukraine had been working very closely with a lot of intergovernmental organizations such as the OSCE for monitoring, having a process in place to, as we see here, protect whistleblowers. If information is shared, do we have a way to kind of ensure that, hey, that person, if they followed the law, has the ability to make that publicly known? Those are essential tenets in a democracy, and you could probably bring up the case of Snowden, as a point of comparison. Did we have a democratic process in place to protect someone like that? Certainly not in that case, but I think that the long-term implications here are going to be more independence and hopefully less kind of threats or attacks to that independence from the government, in the kind of continuing, invitations from the Ukrainian government to different kind of watchdog and monitoring agencies that give the skills, that are from the EU and take a look and give an assessment, that type of thing. Any thoughts there?
Well, Ukraine is blessed with being poor, so it will obey and continue the reforms so far. And good luck with that agreement about like rare mineral like resources.
Yeah.
Yeah. True.
Again, just to drive the point home, I don't think there's a world leader that's under a greater threat of assassination than Volodymyr Zelensky. I don't think there's. I mean, we could debate it, right? But you have to we have to understand the context of these larger, legislative judicial decisions within the immediate reality of the fact that the Russian spy and hybrid threat networks are doing everything they can to, and have been doing everything they can to remove Zelensky from power, to discredit Zelensky and his government, and to generally just destroy Ukraine from the inside out every single day, day
Hmm.
after day after day. The last time I even heard the numbers, it was something like Zelensky's had been like they had 7 attempts on him or something like that, all of
Wow.
which had been foiled. So
Jeez.
the fact that the card can be pulled that we need to do something for national security is not an invalid card in Ukraine
Mm,
in many circumstances.
I would agree with
Whereas
that.
if we look at like the Washington D.C. right now scenario, where I don't necessarily see the threat. There's all sorts of bloggers that came out, recorded the zoo, and they recorded the downtown and things like that,
Mm,
and just said there's no reason to deploy the National Guard. This is a manufactured threat. Whereas in Ukraine, there are no threats that are. I've not seen any manufactured threats in Ukraine since I don't know our time. Since what? Because the threats exist and they're very real.
mm-hmm.
There's no need to
Yeah.
manufacture anything.
True.
And even when the government could use that card, they don't. They
Yeah.
listen to the
Good
people
point.
and respond.
Oh, yeah. All right. Um. So just kind of some final points here. Like yeah, the NABU and you know they held well under pressure. Like there was a volatile 7, 8 days, a lot of protests. No one knows what's going to happen until the law was reversed. And, I think the element of the specter of war, too, is just a whole other dynamic that, has to be considered when there are different priorities. People still saw fit to go out in the street in protest, right? Under, threat of, arrest, whatever, and they knew that wouldn't happen. So I think, again, that's significant and can't be overstated in terms of I would say how well the government responded, right? We're not going to crack down on protests like we saw happen in Belarus, right? For example, there were mass
Yep.
protests about slightly different, right? I think it was about kind of the results of a fraud election,
Oh
but
shit.
the response was arrest the leaders, and that's what you would expect from an authoritarian country like that. So that's significant because you know Belarus and Ukraine have basically been a country in their current form for the same amount of time.
Just like Russia and all the
Yeah,
stands.
true.
Yeah, for Belarus, it's even more challenging than for Ukrainians because we have some protest traditions, probably, which is not necessarily a good thing. We just have them
Yeah,
already because we had
true.
like a couple of Maidans. So for Belarus, it's even harder because they have a
Yeah,
dictatorship right now. So if they protest, and if it's like pro-European protest, for
yeah,
them it probably automatically means that they're in like at war with Russia,
right.
like Ukraine.
Yeah,
And they
I would
don't
agree.
have resource, they don't have institutions, they don't
No,
have any agreement with any other country on this planet
Oh,
and they're
military
complicit
that
there.
could
too.
help them.
Even if their soldiers aren't fighting in Ukraine, the fact they're allowing the weapons and soldiers to leave from Belarus, they are definitely complicit,
They are
whether
a proxy. Yes, they're
they
part of the
like it or not.
Axis. Yes.
100%. So just kind of on a last note here, happening, I believe, right now as we
Yup.
speak. I think they had already met from the little bit I saw, and I think there was going to be a press conference. I don't know if that's
It's
happened
ongoing.
yet. Another thing that was interesting too, just anecdotal, I'll say real quick, is it seemed like Putin and Trump were actually talking briefly without interpreters, which was the first time I had seen that. I suppose Putin speaks a little bit of English, I guess, maybe just kind of
It's
pleasantries.
English.
He speaks
Okay.
English.
Oh well, Trump certainly doesn't know Russian,
No.
so I thought that was interesting. But the point of this is what's going to happen. There was talk about inviting Zelensky to Anchorage too, and that didn't happen. Now Trump's kind of saying, "Well, we'll have a separate, more important meeting." At least Trump
Eh,
said, I'm not there to negotiate on the part of Ukraine, which kind of,
he said that?
what's yeah, on Air Force
Really?
One, yeah,
Wow.
someone I don't know what the exact question was. I was a little surprised to see that
What a
actually.
character development
Um,
anime arc that
yeah,
is.
I know.
Jesus.
So that was interesting. Oh, what do we think is going to be the result? Apparently, there was talk about offering some of the minerals, but and Trump keeps saying that land will have to be exchanged on both sides, which I don't know how that would work. And he's, as far as I know, the only
It
one
won't.
saying that. I don't know, but
No.
I
what
don't
can
think
really get
Ukrainians
done?
need any Russian land.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Just
Do we,
Ukrainian.
it'll be just I like that. It'll be announced. I assume today in a couple hours or so, kind of what the result was, what the talking points were. Do we think there's anything of significance that will come out of this? Kind of breaking news. You know what I mean?
Artem
I
nailed it.
don't. Yeah.
Yo, let's next slide this
Zero
because
yay big.
I got
Zero yay
screenshots.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Next slide. Oh, here we go.
here we go. I got screenshots from the YouTube stream ahead of this
Huh?
pot. This
Huh?
this is the kind of shit that's going on. Pardon my French. It's a lot of Indians, a lot of Pakistanis, a lot of
Oh, that's
Russians
funny.
praying that their guardian angel save their Z shock troopers. It's just toxic, horrible garbage, and that is
That's funny.
like that top right screenshot where Putin has a funny face on. He's pretending that he can't hear. Is after the reporter said, "Putin, when will you stop bombing civilians in Ukraine?"
Oh,
Um, and he pretended to not hear them.
That is funny.
This is a hard one, because if you look at the actions of our intrepid leader, the American president, there has been ongoing debate in this podcast and elsewhere that he could be an asset that's compromised. He could be an asset that doesn't understand. He could just have a self-inflated sense of worth. He could have just a chronic misunderstanding of Eastern European history, whatever it is. I don't know why he has this switch in rhetoric. But Stephen, if we could do next slide.
Uh-huh.
This is the timeline, ladies and gentlemen, for all of this stuff to happen here. So the rhetoric is a good first step. Action would be better. Rhetoric being the good first step is the hallmark of the Democratic Party, which Trump ostensibly is not a part of here. So we really need to focus on the results that come out of this, which, clear rhetoric serves to dispel Russian propaganda, which has, that has utility. Great. What Trump needs to be saying here to resolve this conflict is actually put teeth behind the many threats that he's issued to Putin and not do things like we've seen from June to July, where 85 co-sponsors in the American Senate had a bill to put 500% tariffs on Russian oil and secondary countries, I forget the term, but secondary nations that purchase Russian oil. We see
Periphery nations?
whatever, I don't know the term right now.
Oh.
It may not even be the official term. It's just the people that buy Russian oil also get the same tariff. They get slammed, right? So we need to see a stop to we give him 2 weeks. Oh, we give Putin 50 days. Oh, we give him more time to end the ceasefire. Right? I checked my phone. It is right now 5:12 p.m. Eastern time, and there is, Lviv had 1, 2 rocket alerts just today.
Oh wow!
So I don't know why he fails to understand still to this point that Trump is a bull, or not Trump, Putin is a bull, whatever. But Putin is a bully. There's no reasoning with the bully. The conversation needs to be, Putin, you have 1 week to evacuate all of your forces, or we will quintuple the American delivery of 155s, F-16s, ATACMS, HIMARS. We will deploy all of our airplanes to eastern Poland. They will serve to take down incoming air targets as you send them in. This is very easy hardline rhetoric. This is the shit that Reagan used. This is the shit that Kennedy used, and this is the only type of thing that Russians understand is force. Nothing else will be useful, and Trump's not going to do that. So this will be a nothing meeting. Thank God the Europeans have stepped up.
Seriously.
So
it's difficult to deal with European bureaucracy because there is no one leader. You need to talk to all of them.
Correct.
True.
In circles.
Yeah. Yes. And they all have to ratify.
So this is the European madness that we don't like, but it's very useful for the moment.
You have a very weird relationship with the Europeans. We could even do a stream about that sometime.
Alrighty. Well, yeah, we'll see what unfolds, and I'm sure the outcome of this meeting will be discussed, by us at some point too. But
is it done, the meeting already, or not?
No, it's not.
I think, it's ongoing. I think.
It's ongoing, and then they talk, but still, it's not enough of time. If it lasts at least at least 5 hours, maybe something will be afterwards.
We'll probably hear something today, but it's 1 o'clock there, 12. I don't know what time it is in Alaska, but pretty early still. So
Putin will never meet with Zelensky directly.
Would he with a proxy in a third country?
Yeah, because then he can just waste time, and he can can display the illusion of diplomacy, which has been enough for Trump up to this point.
Exactly.
Well, the best case scenario that happens in terms of and like towards like ceasefire for the moment. Could
Mhm.
be something like we had like a construction with Turkey. So we can communicate with Turkey. Turkey communicates with Russia, and we don't have like the direct communication with them. So this is the best case scenario that could happen, but I sincerely doubt so.
Yeah, me too.
Well, and nothing came of that either, really, right?
Well,
Like they didn't send their
Well,
top negotiating team, is my
Yeah.
understanding.
the Ukrainians agreed to it.
I'm talking about Ukrainian wheat situation. So it's
Oh,
not just the peace deal negotiation when they meet in Turkey. So we communicate with Turkey like about the exporting our things like
Sure.
through the Black Sea. But so far, this is very unlikely that something happens.
Yeah, I agree. No significant breakthroughs.
I think this is
Alrighty.
just Putin's gonna charm Trump. The Trump is gonna give him some kind of additional leeway.
Yeah,
And
so
we will continue
they
on.
will postpone the like sanctions
Yeah,
or like
exactly.
possible
Yes,
sanctions
exactly.
again.
Yes.
So
This will
for
be
Trump, he's being like the most expensive probably prop on this planet for the Russian propaganda news and
Right.
pictures.
yes.
Yeah.
It should be a very straightforward conversation. Why do you
Right.
continue to bomb Ukraine? Why did you launch a huge summer offensive at the cost of, thousands and thousands of your men per day? Why are you doing this? Stop immediately, or
Yeah.
we will militarily escalate this in order
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, but you don't negotiate like this. You take action first, and they say that was the beginning. So if you don't stop, you escalate and escalate.
Well, that's how
So,
you and I would
Because
do it, but that's
not
not
how.
church. Yeah.
okay,
All right. Well, I think those were all the points we had. So, yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
good talk points.
Thanks,
All right.
gents.
Very cool.
Thanks, everybody. We can kill the stream now. So we'll do that. I guess keep an eye out for everything. And thank you, Stephen, for putting the slides together
Yeah.
on time for the time. All right.
All right.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.